Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
Yeah?
No, not that Beetlejuice, the other Beetlejuice. The Beetlejuice that made us laugh, made us sad, and went out of its way to give us the creepy crawlies. But I'm sure all can agree, a movie that brought joy to generations and inspired us all with its wacky humour that so effortlessly found comedy in the most depraved and dire of situations. Easily one of Tim Burton's best movies, with a cast that was made up of some of the best talents Hollywood had to offer, as well as young and upcoming stars that dazzled us with their performance, proving their worth with career-defining roles and going on to achieve much more. Well, not all of them perhaps. Beetlejuice is a timeless classic that made itself stand out with its oddly crafted plot, dissonant character relationships, and almost anti-fairy tale style of storytelling. The fantastically weird formula that Burton managed to conjure up in 1988 is for me and many others a childhood memory I'll never forget. I'll always remember as a kid how that wonderfully imaginative intro would trick me into always thinking the film was going to be scarier than it actually turned out to be. It had this spooky but at the same time weirdly upbeat and riveting music which played over the beginning sequence as we travelled through the miniature town and hillside, ending up at the mansion where of course the story begins. What a way to start. Add to the mix Michael Keaton's epic performance as Beetlejuice himself with his snappy comedy, psychotic mannerisms and quirky physicality, and well, the rest is history. Therefore, it's fair to say that a sequel has been a long time coming, 30 odd years in fact. It was originally intended to be made just a few years after its predecessor and was to be titled Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, but Tim Burton and Michael Keaton busied themselves with Batman Returns instead. Then comes Kevin Smith, who wrote the draft for Burton's Superman movie that never happened, and was later offered the opportunity to write Beetlejuice 2, but then declined it. Just over 3 decades later, and we're finally going to get to see if it was worth the wait. So with the ever-increasing popularity of Michael Keaton, who we see in just about everything these days, now returning as the famous anti-hero that needs no introduction, then you have the nostalgic power and fame of the IP itself. The name Beetlejuice alone will bring droves of long-time fans as well as newcomers back to the cinema for the sequel. It would also be criminal not to mention the return of Winona Ryder as Lydia. No longer a gothic teenager of course, but all grown up with a daughter of her own played by Jenna Ortega, who is quickly becoming a household name after having starred in Tim Burton's Wednesday series as well as some other prominent horror titles such as Scream and the movie X. But perhaps most importantly is Tim Burton back in the director's chair, hopefully giving us his A-game and providing enough connective tissue to the first film that we recognise the familiar humour, disjointed mayhem and creepiness that the original instilled in us so well. Interestingly, the film has a lot of producers, which could be a good sign. Some may think, well, that's too many cooks in the kitchen, but you know what? The job of a producer is anything from coordinating the writing, filming and editing to pretty much financing the whole project. If you look at this as a positive sign, then it's fair to say there is some major appeal going on for this film, and a lot of people have confidence in the sequel and want it done well. I mean, Brad Pitt's company Plan B Entertainment is even heading the production with Brad himself on the team as a producer, a role that he has acquitted himself in many times before. My biggest concern lies in the quality of the script. The writers Alfred Gould and Miles Miller have a mixture of the good, the bad and the ugly when it comes to critique of their work. But seeing as they both recently worked in collaboration with Burton on his Wednesday show, maybe they've all seen eye to eye on what Beetlejuice 2 needs to be, and having the writers and the director on the same page, so to speak, and on friendly terms is always a plus. After all, more often than not, when a movie flops, the usual culprit tends to be long-running disputes between the director and the studio over, you guessed it, the script. So with all the perfect ingredients in place, well, mostly, what can we expect from Beetlejuice 2? Expect a long wait, that we know for sure. Tim Burton announced that they were a day and a half away from being done when production shut down due to actor strikes. So currently the release date is September the 6th, 2024, but depending on how long the strikes continue, this could be again pushed further back. At least that means they have plenty of time in the editing room to start piecing it all together nicely. But in terms of the story, as well as the general tone of the film, there are a few things that have me intrigued and some that have me a little apprehensive. Reports suggest that the underlying theme will be more emotional attachment, and that we will be treated to much more of a human connection than its predecessor. The cinematographer named Haris Zambalukas commented, "At its heart, Beetlejuice 2 is a story about family, And now it's 30 years later, what are the intricacies of the human condition in keeping a family together all this time, set in the craziest world possible? Now, I would say that most of the comedy from the original Beetlejuice came from this kind of disconnect that certainly many of the characters had with each other, but also we the audience experienced with the characters as well. I don't mean that in a bad way, of course, as I love the characters and the cast as well, but it had this kind of black humour that was very intentionally based on the lack of emotion expressed by the living and the dead. I mean, forget about the dead just for a second, they can be forgiven for lacking such human qualities, but let's just talk about a dysfunctional family when it comes to Lydia and her self-obsessed and materialistic parents. But what resulted from this absence of human connection and emotion was an incredibly dry, witty and very dark comedy that was hilarious to watch. So I do wonder how, if at all, they will preserve the unique and clever comedy DNA that defined what the first Beetlejuice was. Now, going into the sequel that has been described as having much more of a human connection and emotional story, is it still possible to have that brand of humour in a film that replaces the very thing that allowed it to exist in the first place? That's my concern. If we have the best of both worlds with a strong emotional connection towards Lydia and her daughter's story, meanwhile other characters, as well as I expect many of the undead, will provide the much needed laughter and depraved comedy that we remember so well from this IP. I also hope that Michael Keaton is able or allowed to fully reprise everything we know and love from the character of Beetlejuice, right down to a T. I don't want to see a different version of this character, one that has matured or evolved, mellowed in any way, especially a version of Beetlejuice that has more sympathy or anything that will diminish what makes up his personality. I've enjoyed much of what Keaton has achieved in his career, and although it was fun to watch someone of his calibre portray the villain or hero in Marvel, DC or whatever big projects he's been attached to recently, I'd love more to see him go back to his roots with the creative acting that he's so good at. Some other aspects of the first film I would love to revisit in the sequel have to be the sand dunes of Saturn. That of course only exist in some form of limbo between the Netherworld and the world of the living. Although the animation looks very ancient in today's standards, there is a charm to it that only comes from that handcrafted love and care and attention to detail that has all but been replaced by CG nowadays. But I remember as a child having this instant anxiety when Adam and Barbara accidentally visited this place and had seconds to try and escape. It was easily the creepiest part of the film. There was something about the isolation of the location, the music, and the fact that these unexplained giant worms could appear from anywhere that really freaked me out. Does anyone remember the Wheelers from Return to Oz? Ugh. Another 80s classic that had wonderfully imaginative visuals as well as a great story for children that feels missing these days. But I would get the same sensation of something making my skin crawl when seeing these things whizzing around as I would when our protagonist tried to escape Saturn before the grotesque sandworm could devour them. Sadly, with no trailer as of yet, we cannot piece together any story elements, and any talk of the plot would be pure speculation. We know from set photos that a wedding takes place, which is most likely the marriage of Lydia's daughter, but there is also a funeral that I can only assume is for Lydia's husband, as we have no more information regarding other family members so far. Catherine O'Hara will be returning as Lydia's mother, Delia, once again, thank God. Her style and swagger, as well as her self-obsessed and rapacious attitude, was something to behold in 1988. It would be very interesting to see how the relationship between Lydia and her mother has evolved. Lydia is still sporting the gothic look in set photos that was basically her image as a teenager in the previous film, so I do wonder if there is still an essence of rebellion and resentment being harboured towards her mother, and well, can you blame her? But once we have the trailer, then we can understand the tone of the film. It sounds like it will be more anchored in emotional investment, but you know the humour is going to get us good when they announce that Willem Dafoe, probably one of the strangest and most fascinating actors currently in the film industry, will be playing an afterlife law enforcer. Wow, I'm getting strong vibes of Kevin Bacon in Cop Car mixed with the lunatic nature of Dafoe's performance in The Lighthouse, so something big to look forward to there. Also, Johnny Depp will be making a cameo, I'm pleased to say. I believe Depp and Burton have made around 10 films together, so it's nice to know there is still a collaboration between them after all that's happened to the poor guy, shall we say. Otherwise, Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis will not be making a return. Kind of makes sense when you think about it. But Beetlejuice has now a wife, apparently, played by the beautiful Monica Bellucci. Now, one has to ask whether this was consensual, or in the typical fashion of Beetlejuice, was it a forced marriage? If Beetlejuice hasn't changed his ways, hopefully, then it may appear that he'll be up to his old tricks again this time around. I imagine, as was the case in the first film, Lydia and her daughter may require the aid of Beetlejuice for whatever reason, and no doubt this will come at a cost to them. Most likely Beetlejuice will try to deceive them, as is his way. Even if they do tread old ground and kind of rehash the old story, sometimes the tried and true formula just works, so if it isn't broken then don't try and fix it, may be the case here. So listen, I'll be making another video about this intriguing sequel once we get more information or a trailer. But in the meantime, please let me know your thoughts on what you expect from Beetlejuice 2 and if you're looking forward to it or not. Always love to hear from you, and please remember to stay entertained. Take care.